Next from Springfield, we sit down for a one-on-one interview to get a behind-the-scenes take on the Rod Blagojevich impeachment with Bernard Sieracki, a senior lecturer at the Illinois Institute of Technology. This runs about 50 minutes.
Bernie Sieracki, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you.
You and I have known each other for a number of years, and for 30-some-odd years you were a lobbyist down at the Capitol, so you're quite conversant with the workings not only of government, but of some of the recent history over the last 40 years or so, of who the players were and all. And to that end, at some point you quit lobbying, you've become a PhD, and now are working, or completing work, I should say, on a book that will be published later this fall on the impeachment of Rod Blagojevich.
Right.
Tell us, give us a bit of an overview. First of all, what does the book cover? I mean, we know, where do you pick up the action and where does it end, and why did you decide to write it?
The book covers the 8 weeks and 2 days from the time he was arrested to the time he gets off the plane and they said, "You're no longer governor." And that was 8 weeks and two days, a period of 8 weeks and 2 days. When it happened, I recognized immediately that it was probably the most momentous event that the Illinois legislature has ever conducted, and I was very interested in it, and I thought I may want to do something with this someday. So I went to every hearing. I attended every minute of the Senate trial in the gallery. And as you say, I've been doing this for almost 40 years, and I know everybody. And I thought, well, I may do something with it. And the years passed, and about 3 years ago, I realized that no one had done anything on it. There had been a couple of books on Blagojevich, but nothing on the impeachment process. This is the book. I wanted the book to be a legislative history. I wanted it to be a history of what the legislators encountered, and so I began to write it about 3.5 years ago, and I have well over 50 plus interviews on tape. It all relied on primary sources. There's no secondary, a few secondary sources, but that's basically for background. I have over, I think, 57 interviews. Some of them have been 6 hours long, not 6 hours, but two, and interviewed absolutely all the key players, and wrote the book. I presented it to 2 universities. Both universities said they want to publish it. They reviewed it, and Southern Illinois was very easy to work with, and I decided to go with Southern, and there it's in the production stage right now, and hopefully it'll be coming out in November before Christmas.
And what is it called?
Well, it's called, I worked for 3 years with the title being A Just Cause, the impeachment and removal of Rod Blagojevich, and about 3 months ago I said, you know, Reckoning might be a better title, the impeachment and removal of Rod Blagojevich, and so I informed Southern Illinois, and they said, oh, well, we like A Just Cause better than Reckoning. And so we're talking. One thing I failed to mention is that Governor Edgar has agreed to write the foreword, and I've sent the manuscript off to him, and he'll do the foreword and deal with Southern Illinois in that too. So I'm very happy about that. And
I mean, obviously, you want people to buy the book when it comes out, and it's not out yet, so we're not going to go into the book in its entirety and what it all covers. Perhaps we can do that after it is out and do a more in-depth. But did you, in the course of your interviews, did you talk to Governor Quinn?
No, and I approached Governor Quinn's staff on several occasions and said, you know, I'd like to talk to the governor, I'm doing this, and they did not seem to be interested in having me talk to Pat Quinn. I had occasion to to be with him during his tenure, and I thought about asking him, and I said, no, doesn't seem to have an interest. And frankly, Pat Quinn did not play any role at all. Pat Quinn was told to show up after the governor was removed, and we're going to swear you in, and that was that evening that they swore him in. He had nothing to do with the investigation, the House investigation. He had nothing to do with the trial.
When you say the investigation, I mean, a lot of people are going to think of the investigation as it was put together by the feds or Peter Fitzgerald.
The investigation that I refer to is basically when he was arrested. The House needed to find cause for impeachment, and very...
You know, I think I misspoke. It was Patrick Fitzgerald, wasn't it, the prosecutor? Yeah. Go ahead, Adam.
Well, the criteria in the Illinois Constitution of 1970 for impeachment is one word: cause. It doesn't qualify cause at all. I spoke to Ann Lucin, who was was an attorney on the staff of the convention. I talked to Ron Smith, who was and they're both law professors at John Marshall, and I talked to Ron, and Ron was a member of a delegate to the Constitutional Convention. And I said, well, you know, why did you just insert this nebulous word cause? And basically they said they felt that impeachment was a political, and I'll quote them, thing, and that it would be up to the legislators to define cause.
What it means.
And it's very nebulous. So, I mean, it could be the way you part your hair.
Without giving away, again, too much, let me ask this. As you got into the book, you obviously knew what was public knowledge, just as we all did. It was a trial that was heavily covered, and I'm sure any number of people paid attention to what was being reported. Did you find out things that you didn't expect to know? I mean, are there some anything that will be kind of, I don't want to know what they're shocking or surprising?
I think that the way I describe it is I couldn't make some of this stuff up. And it deals it's the story of the legislators and the staff and the outside counsel. It focuses on that aspect of it. It's a legislative history. It's their story. It's what they did, how they responded to the situation that Illinois had been in for 6 years, and now the public knowledge that this was going on, and what the cause for the arrest was made public, and so they had no choice.
Well, we might remind the public that the feds arrested the governor because he was being wiretapped, and he was referencing the appointment of a new senator following the election of Barack Obama to the presidency.
Among other things.
And so they were concerned that he was basically going to be selling a Senate seat. Now he did, Governor Blagojevich did end up appointing someone to the Senate, Roland Burris, the former Attorney General, but in any event, that was as a reminder, just not that Mr. Burris was guilty of anything here. I'm just saying that Governor Blagojevich was still in power and did appoint somebody.
Right.
But I think everyone who's covered who was around, the lobbyists, the lawmakers, everyone who wasn't on the governor's staff thought that Rod Blagojevich was a rather unusual governor, and that's putting it lightly, that he just was glib but not deep, and
I think that's absolutely true. And not to give away the book, but I do refer to the people involved in the legislative process, lobbyists, legislators, staff people. We resemble the citizens of Pompeii. We heard the rumblings, but we went along with our daily lives like nothing was happening, and it erupted. And it was overwhelming when it happened.
Had you ever heard in your course of your interviews, or had you heard even just as when you were lobbying, was there ever discussion of impeaching Blagojevich prior to the feds taking their action? I mean, just because people found him so confounding, and he was almost like the captain on a ship who would never come to the bridge and was playing Scrabble down in his stateroom.
There were calls for his impeachment, both by Democrats and Republicans, and I'll tell you frankly that the House was prepared. The committee to investigate his actions to develop cause for impeachment met 6 days after the arrest, and they had already put the tapes or the charges together in 6 days. Now, they're either the most superhuman beings in the world, or there was something, they were prepared for this, and they would fully admit, the House would fully admit that they were prepared to build a case against him, an administrative case. Now, one of the reasons that there was a hesitation to impeach him before he was arrested is because he was a master PR person, and what the Speaker would have been faced with was, you know, this was strictly political. He would have gone on TV and in the press and said, look, I'm just fighting for the people, and they're just trying to, those evil cabals, and that evil cabal in Springfield is trying to get rid of me, and I'm for you. So it would have been very difficult to just do it on administrative charges alone, and that's basically what they had prepared. I mean, they weren't doing criminal investigation, but the House had some very solid administrative charges, ignoring JCAR, for one, his efficiency initiatives, where he would take money that was allocated to a department back, put it in the general revenue fund, and then use it for his supporters in contracts that he wanted to obtain. So there was, but that was very difficult to understand. But the criminal charges, that was the trigger. Once that happened, it was not so much an impeachment investigation; it was an inquisition.
How, when you went about interviewing the people that you interviewed, and obviously you focus on the legislative process, how eager were the lawmakers to share their recollections? Some
were very eager. For instance, I spent 6 hours with David Ellis.
David Ellis was the prosecutor.
The House prosecutor.
In fact, we interviewed him about an hour and a half. Not to interrupt too much,
no,
but I mean, some of the Illinois Channel viewers may recall seeing that interview, and I know during that interview I had asked him what did the Speaker think of Rod Blagojevich, and he was saying that he, from the get-go, Speaker Madigan had a negative view of Rod Blagojevich, and in very short order wouldn't meet with him at all.
That's absolutely correct. I mean, you couldn't have two more diverse personalities. The Speaker is a product of the wards of Chicago, and there are certain values that ward politics in Chicago nurtured, especially in the 50s and 60s. And those values are things like loyalty and competence and some very positive values. And Rod Blagojevich was just the absolute opposite of those values. There was no loyalty, there was no competence, there was no adjustment to reality.
Rod Blagojevich's agenda seemed to be Rod Blagojevich.
Well, exactly, and it was simply what his idea of being governor was simply a stepping stone to the presidency of the United States.
I know people now, you know, given that he's sitting in a federal prison, will find that shocking, but I would say his entire governorship, as you just said, was basically a campaign for the presidency. One of the Democratic House members said to me, and I thought it was very well put, this was long before the impeachment, the trouble with Blagojevich is he spends like a Democrat and taxes like a Republican. And I think he wanted to go, Blago, for the presidency to say, I expanded health care for children, I did all these great social things, and yet I never raised taxes, so he could say that to the conservatives. as if he were the miracle worker, when in fact it's one of the reasons why Illinois is in such a financial pickle that it is now because of his governorship.
Exactly. And the corruption around him, Terry, started almost immediately. I mean, it was within, I would say, 3 or 4 months after he took the oath of office. There were investigations on his activities, and it was blatant.
I mean, we don't want to get either one of us sued, but what kind of, when you say it was blatant, what kind of activities were going on?
The people we won't get sued because they're in
or
jail.
Allegedly going on.
They were, some of them are in prison right now. Tony Resco's in prison. Stuart Levin, Joe Carey, these people that all the way down the line. People, Aliata, who was appointed to the, I can't think of it right now, but it's the
was that the
medical hospital
facility?
And it was blatant. It was just, you knew what, if you would walk into the famous, any watering hole, as I like to say here in Springfield, you knew what it cost to become a director. You knew what it would cost to become a member of a board. And it was just, and you dealt with Tony Resco, who was not a government official at all, and Chris Kelly, who later committed suicide. And it was just so blatant, and it just, as I say, we heard the rumblings, but no one really paid attention to the
Relative to the book, we said it's going to be coming out in roughly November or thereabouts.
Hopefully, yes. It's in production right now.
You saw it, as you said, that it was kind of a book, but what do you hope people will get out of this? And to what extent do you think, and by the way, this was, as a reminder, the first impeachment of a governor in Illinois history, so when we did speak with David Ellis, who is now a judge, but he was saying, I mean, he had to come up with the procedures because there was no precedent.
Right.
To what extent will your book, if ever Illinois has to go through this again, would it be an aid to someone in the future as far as the process, or what is it that you hope people would take away from the book?
I think what I wanted to do when I wrote the legislative history is I wanted someone to be able to go to a library 100 years from now and get this book and to put themselves right there in the process, right? Be at the hearings, be in the Senate room. By the way, I put a caveat on that, if we still have libraries 100 years from now. But I think you're absolutely correct, there was no roadmap to this. And Eric Madeir played a great part in how do you run a Senate trial. And he looked to a trial that we had in the 1830s for Judge Theophilus Smith, who was a Supreme Court justice and was accused, strangely enough, of selling offices, and had a trial. He was impeached and had a trial. It was in Vandalia in January. Very few people can get to Vandalia in January in the 1830s, so they didn't have a full Senate. And the majority voted to remove him, but he didn't hit 2/3. And so he was not impeached. But Eric Madeir spent an awful lot of time looking at that trial.
And Eric Madeir was a counsel to Senate President Cullerton.
Excuse me, yes, right. He was a counsel to
who has
John
now
Cullerton.
left that position and is in private practice.
And he looked at the Arizona impeachment that happened recently before that, about 4 years before that. And he looked at Bill Clinton's impeachment trial and looked at the way they set it up and cobbled together procedures along with the House prosecutor to how we're going to get this. They invited Blagojevich to come in, to be able to defend himself, to have counsel in front of the Senate, and he decided that, and took the advice of his father and son team, the Sam Adams Sr. and Sam Adams Jr., and decided that he would go and become a celebrity instead of going on the trial, attending the trial, because they were thinking of the criminal charges, and this was the advice that they gave him, that O.J. Simpson and Robert Blake, the guy that played Beretta, were both accused of murder, and they got off. So we're going to make you a celebrity. You're going to go on The View and the Oprah Winfrey and
I think he was on things like
Letterman.
I don't remember if it was I was going to say Letterman or something. Yeah.
And didn't his wife eat bugs or something on a reality Survivor?
Oh, that's right, that's right.
And that was the strategy. And so he didn't show up, and so
Until the last day.
till the last day, and that was a surprise. The Senate was informed. I'll tell you quickly. When John Harris was his chief of staff, and John Harris was arrested with Blagojevich, and the acting chief of staff became Clayton Harris, who was on the governor's staff for about 8 months, and was not involved in this at all. And the day before, he told Clayton Harris to inform the president that he would like to make a statement. Now they had invited him, and he had not come to the trial. So there was a problem: is can he come now? Because when they called for him, he was not there. So Eric Medeiros decided if we grant him leave, the Senate grants permission, then the Senate is still in control of what's going on, because frankly they did not know what he would do.
Could he have been? He could have been sitting there, I guess, during the entire
thing.
time.
And
Would he have had the right to cross-examine the witnesses? Or?
yes,
And so that's what he turned down. And so his only appearance was immediately before the vote in the Senate, in which any number of senators spoke. He came in, made a speech, and left, and then went out, as you alluded to, and went out, flew back to Chicago on the plane, and by the time he landed, he was no longer the governor.
that's right.
Not one senator voted to acquit him. They all voted to remove him from office. Do you think, was there anything, well, let's say that, given the vote, was your conclusion, just looking at the process, that this was a fair process?
Absolutely, absolutely fair. And there were a few senators very few senators, that were very uncomfortable voting to impeach him. And in fact, one, and I'll tell you, Ricky Hendren, and it's in the transcript, was really reluctant to, and tried very much to obfuscate what was happening, the procedures.
Did you interview him?
No, I did not. No, I did not interview Ricky, but I do. The transcripts are pretty plain. I mean, it's pretty convincing. But I think at the end, there was just no way anyone could not vote to impeach him. I mean, it would just have been political suicide to line him.
Let me stand back to give a little bit broader view. What was the impact of Rod Blagojevich on Illinois as a state and on Illinois politics?
Hard to assess. Hard to assess what the impact was. The culture did not change, and I'm not. That's not an indictment of the culture. I'm just saying that we went through.
And when you talk about the culture, though, what are you talking about?
The
feeling within the Capitol?
Yes,
or?
the way things are done, the traditional way of doing things. That did not change. I think Rod Blagojevich crossed the line. I mean, I'd like to say that politics is, and if we try to deny it, but it is a process of reciprocal agreements. And the Chicago precinct captains used to say, one hand washes the other, and both hands wash the face, meaning things get done. Things get done. There's a line. And when you cross that line, and I talked to Dick Simpson just yesterday. Dick just came out with a book in Chicago called Corrupt Illinois, Corrupt Illinois, and has charted the many governors that have gone to jail, the aldermen that have gone to jail, the state representatives that have gone to jail, the minor public officials that have gone to jail. And that there was no reformation. No call for a reformation, no call to go back to the creed of honesty and republicanism, small r. And that just didn't happen. he was an anomaly as a person, and he did definitely, he crossed the line. I think it wasn't the fact that he crossed the line while he was in office. It was he planned to cross the line.
Let me ask you, again, given your nearly 40 years being a lobbyist, what does it say about the civic culture of Illinois that Rod Blagojevich was reelected governor?
It says a lot, and I think, and you know, I'm not. I've always been a nonpartisan person when I became a lobbyist.
Well, and we should say, just as a lobbyist, you have to deal with Republicans and Democrats. You have to have good relations with everyone.
But I think the party failed on both sides. They did not put up a very credible candidate with him. I mean, it was just a, and by that I mean, and it was Judy Bartopinka the second time, and she was a wonderful person and a friend of mine. But she was not a winning person for that position, and the Democrats backed him for unity and are you going to challenge an incumbent governor? And he had a tremendous amount of money. That's something you have to think about. He had, I think, almost $10 million. That doesn't seem like much now when we have people have leftover change of $20 million, but he had about $10 million in the bank. So it's going to take something to beat him. And so I think they just kind of swallowed hard and said, you know, I'm for Blagojevich, now it does. Unfortunately, the citizens of Illinois, we didn't really have a choice, very much so, you know, and that's. So I don't think it. So you know, what is it going to take to have a reformation to our American creed?
Yeah, I was going to say, did anyone learn from that? And do you think we would just make the same mistake again, or do you think there's been some lasting lessons?
I think there's been some lasting lessons that there'll be a greater challenge to someone in that position if they try to do the same thing again. That I think is probably about the only lasting. Though I think the redeeming fact is that right now, as we're speaking in 2015, I think the four legislative leaders are decent, capable people. I really believe that on all of them. And some of them I've known for a long time. And so there's hope there. And so we'll just have to see what happens in the future.
Let's talk just a bit about what you do. You left politics, you got your PhD. You left lobbying, I should say. You got your PhD, and now you're teaching. And as I understand it, part of what you're working on is, well, we could have you tell, but it's improving the management of government, is it not?
That's exactly right. It's I received my PhD in public administration, and if there's anything I know, it's how to run departments and how to run cities. At least that's what I've been exposed to in the state for 40 years. And what we are doing, especially at Illinois Institute of Technology, is developing a team that can go in to either a city or a department or problems in the city and work with innovative solutions, real solutions. Our think tank at IIT is not a policy think tank. It's a applied public management think tank, so that we can help people do that. Give you an example. In Peoria, they have a situation where they are facing. They're going to have to agree with the federal government to put in a new sewer system in it. They call it combined sewer overflow, because right now the sewers and the storm sewers are the same, and when it rains a lot, they overflow, runs down the hill for Peoria and goes in the Illinois River, and that's very bad. So, and the project is estimated to cost $200 million. That's a lot of money for the citizens who pay taxes in Peoria. And what we're going into doing is something called scenario planning. It's a different type of approach, and we're going to look at what areas can be I use this word, regentrified, redeveloped, to attract business, but also put in parks so they can retain water rather than putting everything, just putting in a new sewer system. We're going to put in some natural or some ways of doing it. And we think, frankly, that we could save Peoria, maybe 20% of that $200 million. And that's a lot of money. So those are the type of things we're looking to do. And we're teaching, we've got students involved with this, graduate students, so they'll be involved in the real world.
Let me ask you this. I am sometimes both amazed and frustrated at how government operates. I think any number of people are. And I don't want to make a blanket statement as if to say everything that they touch is wrong or screwed up, but an awful lot of it is. Julie Hamos, who was a director, testified about 3 years ago or so that before a House committee, and here her department spent billions of dollars, that they were using computers that were 30 years old. Why is it that we so often hear these kind of stories about government, that no business would be operating, especially if they had revenues in the billions of dollars, would be operating with computers that were 30 years old? And I mean, that's just one example. One could go on and on. What is it about government that it is often so poorly managed relative to how the private sector is run?
Well, first of all, it's we don't have stakeholders, we have citizens. And I think that's the approach, that's the motive, the motive for IIT, and frankly for UIC, for the University of Illinois in Chicago, is that we're trying to improve the management of operations. We certainly don't manage like we used to do in the 1950s and 60s, so it's changed. You don't have the waste, believe it or not, that you did even in those days. And it's going to be a process that's going to take some time to do. Some states do it much better than other states, but I think Illinois is moving towards doing a better job of government and managing government. And I think, it's actually motivated by reality. There isn't enough money to do all these things anymore, and and you have a very simple choice. You either raise taxes to pay for this. There's no magic bullet to this. Or you start operating more efficiently, and hopefully we're going to be operating more efficiently. When you operate more efficiently, obviously you have to cut somewhere. You have to combine some functions. And that hurts a little bit, but it hurts somebody, but it has to be done.
To what extent is the problem in running government efficiently? In that we don't have good metrics. If we're running a business, we know what the metric is. We're either making money or we're not making money, but you don't use that as a measurement on how well you're doing in government. And to what extent is part of the problem that politicians or the people running government, they want to get reelected. I sometimes think they measure their success by how much press they get, so that they have some press announcement that they're going to be doing some brand new program and it's going to cure some social ill, but there's not enough follow-up to say, does the program work? And there's no downside when the program doesn't work. But yet they got their press announcement, maybe they got reelected because they were throwing money at some problem, whether or not it actually accomplished it.
I think, I'll add something else. It's when you have, we have an interest group society. We have, Madison talked about interest groups and pluralism in the Federalist 10. But if Madison knew the situation today, I wonder what he'd write. I wonder if he'd write for the Federalist 10 the same way, because we've always been a society, the United States has always been a society of diverse interests. And so you have, even before you say we're going to run this efficiently, you come to the basic question of what are we going to run and what programs are we going to have. And so there'll be a clash there, a clash of, well, no, you've got to do this. No, we got to spend it over here. No, we have to have this program. So that has to be worked out. And then there has to be I use the term.
Let me ask this, should we, on the question of metrics, is there a way, or how do you, as a person who would come in and look at how a department's being run, and I suppose you're going to make some evaluation whether it's being run well or not so well, how do you measure success when you analyze a government operation?
I think, well, we can say, look, this is the situation. This is what our data shows. This can be run more efficiently. That can be run more efficiently. You, Mr. Public Official, Miss Public Official, you make the decisions, because that's why you're sitting there. Our job is to simply tell you what's happening. Now, so we have to get virtuous people. We have to get people that look at that and make decisions based on data, hard data.
I'm not asking you,
But let me, one
Go
other
ahead.
thing. One of the most impressive things I've ever heard someone say was Kim Lightford, Senator Lightford, a couple of years ago in response to a debate. And she said, we don't have, and here's what makes the decision-making difficult. We don't have shareholders. We have citizens. We have people out there. And so you're always going to have that disharmony. And now, now, if you're asking, do we have a program that serves the people, but it's run totally in an inefficient manner, now that should be exposed. That should be presented. And that's what we hope we'll to do. Both universities are very much involved in that.
Governor Rauner has never held office before. He comes from a business background. I'm not asking you to endorse him or not, but what are your general impressions and what are your general thoughts about having someone who's not held office before coming in, and here he's wanting to apply changes to make the state run better, get rid of waste? I take him at his word certainly in the sense that unlike others, like a Rod Blagojevich, Bruce Rauner has enough money he could go out and do whatever he wants to do in life. He doesn't need this job to be somebody. He was already somebody.
Right.
To that end, I find him to be an interesting character, and plus, as you mentioned, alluded to, he has so much money, he doesn't have to kiss the ring of every lobbying group that comes in to ask for some favor.
I'm I'm very much, in fact, enthused about Rauner, and certainly there's going to be clashes with the legislatures, which is Democratic controlled, and that's all right, because I think we have two reasonable people in the legislature, two interesting, honest leaders, John Cullerton and Michael Madigan, and I think that it's going to be interesting. It's not going to be easy. Rauner's going to have to face an awful lot of media scrutiny. You know, you said this, but how are you going to do it? But I think there's hope. Maybe I'm whistling in the wind, but I think there's hope, and we'll just have to see how this plays out.
Critics would say that Illinois has not had the process of government functioning the way it should have been. And by that I mean, typically we would have the governor, by design, whoever is in the governor's office, is supposed to be a strong leader,
Right.
who makes proposals, and then the legislature either goes along with it or defeats those proposals, but the legislature...
Or compromises.
The legislature is not supposed to be the leaders as much as they are the board that reacts, the governing board that reacts to the proposals made by the governor's office. But people would point out that Governor Quinn was not a very strong leader, that he was indecisive. Rod Blagojevich, people will say literally they thought he was crazy. To what extent has this last 12 years of Illinois been an unusual period, out of the norm? And to what extent, too, is that very item that we haven't had a strong leader in the governor's mansion who could say, this is where we need to go and how we're going to get there, and that's why the state finds itself in virtual bankruptcy now.
That's exactly right. And in fact, there was rumors that they were talking of solutions under George Ryan to some of the problems we've had. If you look at Jim Edgar, he did a terrific job of pulling us out of a financial situation, difficult situation. We've had Jim Thompson that was very capable. We've had very, very capable.
Many people were fond of Ogilvy.
Very much so. And, but if you, and you're right, under Rod Blagojevich, it was a disaster. Under Pat Quinn, Pat Quinn would never have been governor without the arrest. And very uninspiring and very honest, they say, but totally over his head. And so now there's hope. We have an individual that may be a person that can get along with Mike Madigan and John Cullerton, and he's got two Republicans in the legislature, Chris Rodano and Jim Durkin, that are just really good people. And I think I'm optimistic. It's going to take a little cutting. It's going to take things that are going to have to be done that you're not pleased with, but some people are not pleased with, but that has to happen.
I know you and I could talk for hours, and it would be interesting, at least to us, but let's close out with this. You certainly hear, and it's understandable that the populace at large is cynical about the functioning of government. What do you say to people when you hear them say they're all a bunch of crooks?
Oh, sure. Well, and you know, this is not a new question. A fellow named Samuel Huntington, who passed away a few years ago, but he taught at Harvard and wrote some brilliant books in the 70s and 80s, talks about this. There are several ways, there are a few ways that people respond to a disconnect between what we think government should be and what it really is. And one of the ways is cynicism. Oh, they're all like that. Another way would be hypocrisy. Oh no, they're really trying to do a good job. You know, it's somewhere in the middle of it. I think most of my classes, when I teach Americans, I teach mostly international students. So I'm teaching comparative government in many respects. But when I do get Americans, they'll just say, "Oh, they're all." These are people in political science. These are people in public administration. Yeah, they like it. They all want to be lobbyists. Or run for office, they'll say, yeah, they're all a bunch of crooks. That's not true. And
in fact, a lot of them are almost like the true believers, the people in government. They're the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts.
Exactly. I think of Frank Watson. You know, he was
Frank Watson. Or you know, a lot of people don't like Barack Obama, but I would say Barack Obama was a person who was making something like $70,000 a year working in the Illinois legislature. He could have easily gone out to almost any law firm of size and been making $500,000, and yet he was working for $70,000. And I think that's not so much. I'm not saying it just about Barack Obama, but it's indicative of people work in the legislature because they really are passionate, in many cases, about addressing some social ill that they're very passionate about.
I know we could talk forever, but I just want to draw a contrast. When I first started to be a lobbyist in the 1970s, I mean, legislators, would come up to me, cigar in the mouth, and put tickets in my pocket. I had a predecessor at one firm that gave his American Express card to legislators, and they would go out and do whatever they wanted. The good news is I don't think you do that anymore. You couldn't get away with that. And so maybe there is hope. Maybe it's changing. And with, as I think I told you before, off camera, Terry, we talked, when I first came to Springfield, there were about 186 registered lobbyists. Today there's over 4,000. So the public square has become very crowded, and it's become transparent. So I think there is hope. I think there is hope. We went through 12 years that was pretty rough, and I think we're going to hopefully it'll be better. Dick Simpson, and give a plug for his book, says Illinois is the most corrupt state if you take everybody, all the convictions in the nation.
Larry Sabato said that to me some years ago out in Washington, that he put Illinois right up there with, I think he said Mississippi and Louisiana.
Yeah.
Being amongst the most corrupt states. And here today, as we tape this, a priest in Chicago has been accused of being a runner for the mob and taking messages from a prison where he was a chaplain and bringing it to the other mobsters. So I don't know what it is about Illinois that even some of the priests are corrupted. But we will see, obviously, over the course of the next several years. It'll be fascinating to watch Governor Rauner and to what extent this state can be transformed, not only financially, but perhaps addressing what has been often referred to as that culture of corruption, or the Chicago way, right. and to see if that can be bridged. But either way, we're on for an interesting ride over the next few years.
I was standing on the rail at the Capitol last week, and one lobbyist, was a lobbyist next to me, and another lobbyist walked by and said, "Hang on for the ride." And my response was, "At least we have a ride."
Bernie Sieracki, we appreciate you joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.